All right, we're here. We're here. It is Zerilath, and we're barreling through these these Jewish war readings. Good to see all of you. And yeah, man, I can't tell you. I can't wait to get this done. This week we'll see how I feel. I'm working a kind of a mid shift all week. This is like a 10 to 7 kind of gig, right? So I may or may not want to do an evening stream when I get out. It depends, right? I'm probably not going to do one tomorrow because it'll be day one. I won't have a tremendous amount of proper expectations. I just want to be able to get in there and do my thing. Because as some of you know, I have been off of work for a couple of weeks now without a good expectation of being back in, and hopefully after I get a few things settled, it won't be a huge problem, because although I am still a temp person until the right interview lands, I certainly could still be qualified for unemployment based on being on temp and doing things that are more part-time basis. So just in case I'm not working in another week or something like that, I at the very least will still have the ability to continually file without there being this extended period of time. So anyway, good to see you guys. We got 17 pages today. I played Wolven Throne for you. Axe and Flail. All right. And I've got 3 more bangers coming up. So if I am not confusing myself, we should be here at chapter 16 with Vespasian Emperor. Yes, that should be correct. Good. All right. One second. At this time, news was received of the rising in Gaul. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. The French are at it. But anyway, and how Vindix and the native chiefs had revolted from Nero, as described in detail by other writers. Vespasian's reactions was to step up his campaign. He already foresaw the coming civil wars and the danger to the whole empire, and felt that if he quickly pacified the eastern areas, he would lighten the anxiety of Italy. While therefore the winter lasted, he secured the conquered towns and villages, with garrisons posting centurions in the town and decurions in the villages, and rebuilt many that had been destroyed in the early days of spring. He set out from Caesarea with most of his army and marched to Antipatris. There he stayed 2 days to settle the affairs of the town, and the next day marched on, destroying and burning all the villages around. After reducing the toparchy of Thema and the neighboring districts, he went on to Lida and Jamnia. As these two were subdued already, he settled there a sufficient number of those who had submitted and advanced to Emmaus. After seizing the approaches, one second, just double checking, making sure my mic is on. Okay, good. After seizing the approaches to the capital of this area, he fortified a camp, and leaving the 5th Legion there, marched with the rest of his forces to the toparchy of Bethleptepha. He ravaged with fire this and the neighboring districts, together with the outlying regions of Udamia, building guard posts in strategic positions. Then he captured two villages in the very middle of Idumea, Beteris and Caphartoba, killed over 10,000 inhabitants, took over 1,000 prisoners, expelled the rest of the population, and placed there a large part of his own forces. These overran and laid waste all the hill country. Then, at the head of his remaining forces, he returned to Emos, and from there through Samaria and past Neapolis, known locally as Mebartha. Now it's known as Nablus. He went down to Coria, encamping there on the 2nd of Decios. The next day he arrived at Jericho, where Trajan, one of his generals, joined him with the force from Perea, the whole area beyond Jordan being subdued already. The bulk of the population, without waiting for their arrival, had fled from Jericho to the hill country opposite Jerusalem. But a large section which had stayed behind was put to death. The Romans found the city deserted. Jericho is situated in a plain above which rises a bare, treeless mountain range of very great length, stretching northwards to the Scythopolis district and southwards to the region of Sodom and the far end of the Dead Sea. This ridge is uneven all the way along the uninhabited because of its infertility. So I guess like the land, the soil doesn't yield crop effectively, right? So no one's going to live there. So it's wasteland effectively. Beyond Jordan rises a parallel range beginning at Julius in the north and running southward to Somaron, which borders on Petra in Arabia. In this range is the so-called Iron Mountain, jutting out into Moab. The country between the two ranges is called the Great Plains, stretching from the village of Janabrin to the Dead Sea, and measuring 140 miles by 14. It is bisected by the Jordan and has two lakes in it, the Dead Sea and Lake Tiberias. Opposite in character, the former is salt and sterile, the latter sweet and prolific. And as we all know, the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea, with all of its salt, which is why it's dead. In summertime, the plain is burnt up and the absolute drought makes the air unwholesome, for it is entirely waterless except for the Jordan. This being the reason why the palm groves on the riverbanks are more flourishing and bear heavier crops than those at a distance. Right? So it's giving you an idea of various land values, and probably issues of where scarcity is at. This helps the Romans understand how they can control people, right? By having the ability to limit where people can go, right? It's just like if you want to get out of the system, you might not be able to do so unless you go to the wastelands. And if you go to the wastelands, you're going to fail unless you become a bandit in which you are parasiting off of other people. And those other people then, in turn, will need the authorities to help them deal with you. And thus, that feeds the power of Rome as long as they have conquered any other local authorities, right? This is, and this is part and parcel of how the system sustains itself, by cutting you off from your ability to live outside of it. However, near Jericho, there is an abundant spring, admirably suited for irrigation. It gushes out near the old city, the first in the land of Canaan to be stormed by the Hebrew commander Joshua, the son of Nun. This spring, it is said, at first not only blighted fruit crops, but produced miscarriages in women. In fact, proved unwholesome and destructive of everything, but was sweetened and changed into a most wholesome and life-giving stream by the prophet Elisha, friend and successor of Elijah. I know a little bit of the Elijah and Elisha Bible stories, which are very interesting and some very I can't darn I can't remember what story is running through my head right now. Elisha might be the one responsible for the children teasing him or something, and then he summons 2 she-bears to destroy them or something like that, which I think is an odd story. And I think that that's actually mythology and has something to do with Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, and nothing to do with an actual piece of shit human being who couldn't take some mockery from some children on an open road that were no threat to him, and thus decided to kill them because that was a sign they'd grow up to be enemies of God. I don't know. My theory is that it's supposed to tell you people that act like this will grow up to be your enemy, so destroy them now. That's kind of the idea, right? And these she-bears is like his relationship with God as one of the prophets, right? He's able to summon them because God gave him the power to summon the she-bears, right? This is how the, like I said, this is mythology, right? This isn't history. This is fucking mythology, half of the Old Testament. Okay, miscarriages. When he had been made welcome by the people of Jericho and most hospitably entertained by them, he repaid them and their country with an undying favor. He went out to the spring and threw into the running water an earthenware jar full of salt, then raised his godly hand towards the heaven and poured atoning libations on the ground, beseeching earth to purify the water, and open sweet water veins, and heaven to blend the waters with more life-giving airs, and to give the people round about fruits in plenty and children to succeed them, not letting them ever lack water to give these births so long as they remained righteous. With these prayers, accompanied by many ritual acts based on deep study, he transformed the spring so that the water that had hitherto brought childlessness and famine upon them, from then on furnished them with children and all good things. Indeed, for irrigation, it is so effective that if it merely comes in contact with the land, it benefits the crops more than the water that soaks right in. So, when the other streams, even if freely used, do little good, this tiny stream does a great deal. In fact, it waters more land than all the rest, covering a plain 8.5 miles by 2.5. Now, just remember, these distances are changed. They weren't measuring by mile and such, so 8.5 miles is going to not be exactly correct, but it is 8.5 of something akin to a mile that they measured by in this time. Okay? So, in satisfying the needs of very numerous and very lovely parks, of the palms which it waters there are many varieties differing in taste and name. The richer ones, when trodden underfoot, actually yield a large quantity of honey, nearly as good as the real thing. Bees, too, abound in the district, which also produces balsam, the most valuable local crop, the cypress and the bennut, so that it would be no exaggeration to call the place divine, a place where the rarest and loveliest things are found in such abundance. For as regards its other crops, it would be hard to find another region in the wide world to compare with it. So large is the yield from the seed sown. This is due, I think, to the warmth of the air and the fertilizing power of the water. The warmth draws out the growing plant and makes them spread. The moisture encourages root growth in them all and supplies strength for the summer. When the district is so burnt up that no one goes out if he can help it, If the water is drawn before sunrise and then exposed to the air, it becomes extremely cold and quite unlike the atmosphere around it. On the other hand, in winter, it warms up and the bathers find it most comfortable. The air, too, is so mild that the inhabitants dress in linen. Then when the rest of Judea is under snow, Jericho is 18 miles from Jerusalem and 7 from the Jordan. Both figures a little too big. Okay, so they basically scale that down by 1 or 2 miles. Okay, so the country between the two cities is rocky desert between Jericho and the Jordan and Dead Sea. It is more low-lying, but just as barren a desert. Of Jericho and its great natural advantages, enough has been said. But we must also describe the characteristics of the Dead Sea. This, as I said, is bitter and sterile, but because of their relative lightness, brings to the surface even the heaviest things thrown into it. In fact, it is not easy to go down to the depths even by deliberate effort. Thus, when Vespasian came to examine it, he ordered some non-swimmers to be thrown with their hands tied behind them into deep water, and found that they all came to the surface as if blown upwards by a strong wind. In addition to this, the changing color is remarkable. Thrice daily it alters its appearance and reflects the sun's rays with varying tints. Moreover, in many places it throws up black lumps of asphalt. Hence the Greek name of the Dead Sea, asphaltitis. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so the Dead Sea is known as asphaltitis to the Greeks. And that's cool. I did not know that. That's never mentioned anywhere. The Dead Sea is always just the Dead Sea. Nobody cares to tell you other names that it's known by. These, as they float, are in the shape and size like headless bulls. The lakeside workers row to the spot, seize the lumps one by one, and haul them into their boats. When these are full, it is not easy to get the asphalt away, as the boat sticks to the glutinous mass until they lose it with a woman's menstruous blood and urine. What? Let me read that again. When these are full, it is not easy to get the asphalt away as the boat sticks to the gluttonous mass until they loose it with a woman's menstruous blood and urine, to which alone it yields. What? You're telling me that this is like a glue. It's glue, you're telling me. And the only adhesive solution is women's blood and specifically women's urine. Can't be anybody's urine. It's got to be a lady's urine as well as her menstrual blood. Really? Like a guy can't just like bloodlet and then and piss in a jar and then pour the blood and the piss on it like it has to be a woman? Hey, what's up, Theo? That is that sounds strange, but I suppose that's the idea? I don't know. So it is useful not only for caulking ships, but also for curing bodily sickness. It is included in many medical prescriptions. Okay, so that I would understand, the menstrual blood and urine for their medical practices. But using it to caulk ships, that is weird. That is weird. I do people make shit like that up? Like, did somebody make that up? So the length of this lake is 67 miles, measured from Zoar in Arabia the width of 17, I'm assuming they mean 17 miles. Both figures much too big. Okay. It almost makes me wonder because why would Josephus extrapolate so much? Is he just saying that because he changed things, he changed the language? Did he think that the word that they measured a mile the same way back in the day and just called it a different name, but it was the same distance? Maybe it's not that Josephus is is blowing the numbers out of proportion, but maybe it's because you don't know or understand the measurement units he spoke of in his own language. Anyway, next to it lies the land of Sodom, south of the lake. Okay? Once so rich in crop and in the wealth of its cities, but now dust and ashes. They say that owing to the impiety of its inhabitants, it was burnt up by lightning. Indeed, there are still marks of the fire from heaven and the outlines of 5 cities to be seen, and ashes still form part of the growing fruits, which have all the appearance of eatable fruit, but when plucked with the hand, dissolve into smoke and ash. To this extent, the stories about the land of Sodom are confirmed by the evidence of our eyes. That's a very interesting claim. So he's saying that Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible, were burnt up by lightning from God. And that the ashes of what was destroyed by this lightning gets into the fruit, and then the fruit has this ashen quality where once you pick it, it goes like dust in the wind. There's so many crazy questions I have about these claims that Josephus is making. So anyway, in order to make the encirclement of Jerusalem complete, Vespasian constructed camps in Jericho and Adida, garrisoning each with a mixed force of Romans and allies. He also sent Lucius Annaeus to Gerasa, giving him a squadron of cavalry and an ample number of infantry. Annaeus took the town by assault, put to death 1,000 of the younger men, all who had failed to escape, enslaved the women and children, and allowed the soldiers to plunder everything of value, finally setting fire to the houses before he marched against the surrounding villages. All these, like Roman atrocities, Jewish atrocities, it's all sorts of ridiculous, right? There's a context of the time that is not in this book in full. Sometimes Josephus provides a little bit of context to the general nature and character of how people are being. Otherwise, this is just reactions to people who are resistant to being conquered, while these other people who are practicing a pseudo-divine right are destroying them based on selling this right to rule, right? Just like the issues of any government and their evocation of some higher principle that they put upon the divine that says right to rule channeled through the state. The strong fled, the weak perished, and all that was left went up in flames. Now that the war had engulfed the whole region of mountains and plains, it was impossible to leave Jerusalem. Those who wanted to desert were watched by the zealots, and those who did not yet favor the Romans were shut in by the army which surrounded the city on every side. Vespasian returned to Caesarea and was getting ready to march his entire force against Jerusalem itself when he received the news that Nero had met a violent end after reigning 13 years and 8 days. Possibly 8 months has dropped out of the MSS. I'm not sure what the MSS stands for. So anyway, I might relate how he abused his position by entrusting the management of affairs to those utter scoundrels. Nymphidius and Tigellinus, 2 worthless freedmen, how when these plotted against him, he was deserted by all his guard, ran away with 4 faithful freedmen, and died in the suburbs by his own hand, or how those who had brought him down soon paid the penalty. I might give an account of the war in Gaul and explain how it ended, how Galba, on being invited to mount the throne, returned to Rome from Spain, and how he was accused of meanness by the soldiers, assassinated in the middle of the Roman Forum, and succeeded by Otho. I might describe Otho's campaign against Vitellius's generals, and his overthrow. The disturbances that followed under Vitellius and the fighting round the capital, and the way Antonius Primus and Mucianus destroyed Vitellius and the German legions, and so brought the civil war to an end. But I must excuse myself from describing any of these events in detail because they are matters of common knowledge and have been dealt with by many Greek and Roman writers. To secure continuity and coherence in the narrative, I have summarized the various incidents. Vespasian's immediate response was to put off his expedition against Jerusalem, waiting anxiously to see who would step into Nero's shoes. Then, when he heard that Galba was on the throne, he refrained from all military activity pending the receipt of a new directive, but sent his son Titus to pay homage and seek the emperor's instructions for settling the Jewish problem. With the same object, Agrippa embarked for Rome along with Titus. But while they sailed along the Greek coast in warships because it was winter, Galba was assassinated after a reign of 7 months and as many days, and his office went to Otho, who laid his own claim to the headship of the state. Agrippa decided to complete his journey as if nothing had happened. Titus, by a divine impulse, sailed back from Greece to Syria and proceeded with all speed to Caesarea to rejoin his father. In their suspense from the Roman Empire was rocking, and everything was in the melting pot. The 2 commanders held up operations against the Jews, feeling that while they were so anxious about things at home, an invasion of a foreign country would be inopportune. But there was to be no peace for Jerusalem. There was a young hothead called Simon, son of Gaius, a Gerasene by birth. He was less crafty than John, who was master of the city, but superior in physique and daring, the quality which had caused Ananus, the high priest, to turn him out of his toparchy of Acrabatine. So, driving him into the arms of the bandits who had seized Masada, at first they eyed him warily and only allowed him into the lower part of the fortress, with the women he brought with him occupying the upper part themselves. Later, as a kindred spirit and to all appearances trustworthy, they took him on their plundering expeditions and raids round about Masada. His eloquence, however, failed to persuade them to attempt anything more ambitious. They were used to the fortress and dared not venture far from their lair. But Simon had made up his mind to usurp supreme power. When he heard that Ananus was dead, he withdrew to the hill country. There he proclaimed liberty for slaves and reward for the free. So collecting the scum of the whole district, as soon as his force was strong enough, he overran the villages in the hill country until the constant flow of recruits encouraged him to descend to the lower levels. Soon he was an object of dread to the towns, and many men of good position were led astray by his strength and continual success, so that his army no longer consisted only of slaves and bandits, but included many respectable citizens who obeyed him like a king. He next overran the toparchy of Akrabatane and the whole area as far as Great Idumea. Near a village called Nain, he had built a wall which he used to secure himself from attack, and in the valley of Feran, he found a number of convenient caves and enlarged many others, using them all to safeguard his treasure and to house the loot. There, too, he stored the corn he had seized and accommodated most of his armed gangs. It was obvious that he was training his army in readiness to attack Jerusalem. Alarmed at his designs and determined to nip the growing threat in the bud, the Zealots marched out in force under arms. Simon met them and gave battle, inflicting heavy casualties and driving the survivors into the city. He was not yet so sure of himself as to assault the walls. He embarked first on the conquest of Idumea, setting out for the frontier at the head of 20,000 well-armed men. The Idumea authorities promptly collected the best fighting men in the country, about 2,500 of them, and leaving all the rest to guard their homes against raids by the Sicarii from Masada, awaited Simon at the frontier. Battle was joined and raged all day long, ending without victory to either side. Simon returned to Nain. The Idumeans dispersed to their homes. Not long after, Simon, with a large force, again invaded their territory and encamped near a village called Tekoa. From there, he sent Eleazar, one of his staff, to the garrison of Herodium nearby to induce them to surround the fort. Eleazar had readily admitted by the guards, who did not realize what he had come for, but when he mentioned surrender, they drew their swords and chased him until, unable to fly any further, he flung from the wall into the ravine below and was instantly killed. But the Idumeans were now hold on a second. I've got a little... Now thoroughly alarmed by Simon's strength, and decided not to give battle till they had reconnoitred the enemy forces until they... Is that right? I don't know. That sounds like a typo. I've never heard the word reconnoitred before. I maybe recognized. I don't know what that word is. But we're going to take a break here because that's been page 5. And so, what are we going to play for you guys now? We'll go with this one. This song is a little less heavy than the other ones, and so we'll play the lesser heavy one before the other two real vicious songs. So this is Chronosynthesis with Wrath of God. Hey, there we are. We're back. Okay, so photosynthesis, wrath of God. A little power metal for you. Okay. So, did I lose? Could have sworn I paused at the top of the paragraph? Shoot. 263. 264. Right. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Yeah, somehow my page skipped. Do I know Dragon Force? Of course, everybody and their mother knows Dragon Force. Ugh. How many freaking places, like, I grew up, watching Guitar Hero become the thing, right? And, so, yeah, I know Dragon Force. I know about Dragon Force. I think Dragon Force was much more, I think most people, I think most young people found out about Dragon Force from the video game, to be honest with you. Hey, what's up, Sadiko? I know that Killswitch, yeah, I had heard, the new Killswitch song, from a few months ago. I don't know what the period of time was between the album release date and the single drop, but it was like the Aligned. I think it was called like We're Aligned. Like I liked it. I thought it was kind of weird. Listening to the lyrics. Like, okay, they're aligned. What are they aligned about? And it's kind of like a universal theme. But I think that thematically it was not like my bag, because I had heard some of the stuff that they were writing about in the prior albums, and I said to myself, they're taking a very, very specific position here, and not leaving themselves to a more poetic vibe of things, right? They were thematically coming off a little, I don't want to say they were coming off like a Rage Against the Machine, because they're nothing like Rage, but as far as being a little on the strong liberalism side of things, was kind of what was popping up, right? Which was irritating to me, thinking about some of the other things that were done better for the revolutionary style music coming out of the genre, right? But this one was a lot more, was being a lot more open to interpretation at the same time. Granted, the attitude and inflection in the song can tell you a whole bunch. The context of the era in which the song was released. So anyway, for this duty, Jacob, one of their officers, eagerly offered his services with the intention of turning traitor. Setting out from Orluris, the village where the Idumean army was concentrated at the time, he went straight to Simon, made a compact with him in return for a solemn undertaking that he should always occupy a position of influence. He would first hand over his own hometown, and then help Simon subdue the whole of Idumea. On this understanding, he was lavishly entertained by Simon, and, buoyed up the dazzling promises, returned to his own lines. When, by pretending that Simon's army was many times its real size, he had undermined the morale of the officers and gradually of the whole army, he urged them to receive Simon and hand over all authority to him without a struggle. During negotiations, he sent messengers to invite Simon, promising to disperse the Idumeans, as indeed he did. As the army drew near, he was the first to leap onto his horse and flee with his companions in crime. Panic seized the whole defending force, and before battle could be joined, they left their posts and every man fled to his own home. Having, in this unexpected way, swept into Idumea without bloodshed, Simon, by a surprise attack, captured the little town of Hebron, where he seized a vast quantity of booty and got possession of ample corn supplies. If the inhabitants are to be believed, Hebron is more ancient than any town in the country, older even than Memphis in Egypt. Interesting. Its age is reckoned as 2,300 years. So, like, they're basically making the point that this guy had taken a town that, like, the town itself is kind of like a historical monument, right? So it makes a major statement, and it apparently was a town that was well off to have these supplies that he seized. So therefore, it is this benefit to his agenda. So they affirm that it was the home of Abram, the ancestor of the Jews, after his migration from Mesopotamia, and that his descendants went down into Egypt from there. So probably it was called Hebron because it probably meant it was the city of the Hebrews, is probably what that name means. Their tombs are pointed out to this day in the little town of the finest marble and beautifully fashioned. 3/4 of a mile from the town can be seen an immense terebinth, said to be as old as creation. From there, he advanced through the whole country, not only sacking villages and towns, but ravaging the countryside. In addition to the heavy infantry, he had 40,000 men with him, so that he could not supply his immense host even with the necessities of life. Quite apart from his needs, his brutal nature and vindictiveness against the Idumean people were major reasons for the devastation of their land. Just as in the wake of locusts, we may see a whole forest stripped bare, so in the rear of Simon's army there was nothing left but a desert. Some places they set on fire, some they demolished. Everything that grew anywhere in the country they destroyed, either trampling it down or devouring it, and their heavy feet made cultivated land harder than barren soil. So, like, they did, like, basically military marching over the soil, and, you know, if you compact the soil, it becomes very hardened, and it's hard for a plant to take root. You have to do a whole bunch of extra tilling. So anyway, in short, not a sign remained to show that when they destroyed, so that what they destroyed had ever existed. So they basically made it as if there was never anything there. They reduced it. They totally reduced it. All this roused the zealots to fresh activity. They dared not face Simon in the open, but they laid ambushes in the passes and captured Simon in the open. And captured his wife and many of her servants. Ooh, so they got Simon's woman. So Simon didn't properly protect his family. Then, as delighted as if they had taken Simon himself prisoner, they went back to the city in the belief that he would at once lay down his arms and plead for the return of his wife. Her capture, however, moved him not to pity, but to fury. He came up to the walls of Jerusalem, and like a wounded animal that cannot catch the hunter, he vented his rage upon everyone he met. All who went outside the gates to gather herbs or firewood, old people without arms, he seized and tortured to death. In his boundless indignation, he was ready to feed on their dead bodies. Many he sent back after cutting off their hands in an attempt to terrify his opponents and stir the people to revolt against those responsible. They were ordered to say that Simon swore by God, the Lord of all, that if they did not instantly give him back his wife, he would break down their wall and inflict the same punishment on every person in the city, sparing neither young nor old and treating guilty and innocent alike. These threats terrified not only the citizens but the zealots too, and they sent his wife back to him. So these guys were not super committed. They didn't really think it through, because you freaking are threatening the family of a man who commands an army and of Romans from an empire. Wait, these are Romans? Wait, was Simon of the Romans or Simon of the... Trying to keep all this stuff in my head can drive me nuts. But anyway, long story short is that the guy had a military force that was a threat. And they did this stupid thing. Pacified for the time being, he took a brief respite from continual bloodshed. It was not only in Judea that sedition and civil war were rife, but in Italy too. Galba had been assassinated in the middle of the Roman Forum, and his successor Otho was at war with Vitellius, who claimed the throne as the nominee of the legions in Germany. At Bedracium in northern Italy, battle was joined with Valens and Caecina, Vitellius's general. On the first day, Otho had the better of it. On the second, the army of Vitellius, the carnage was frightful, and when Otho at Brixellum learnt of his defeat, he committed suicide after a reign of only 3 months and 2 days. His troops went over to Vitellius's generals, and Vitellius himself marched into Rome with his army. Meanwhile, Vespasian left Caesarea, and on the 5th of Decius launched a campaign against those parts of Judea that had not yet submitted. Climbing into the hill country, he occupied 2 toparchies, those of Gophna and Acrabeta, then 2 small towns, Bethel and Ephraim. After garrisoning those, he rode as far as Jerusalem, slaughtering many of those he met, and taking prisoners by the score. Zerilath, one of his officers, took a small body of horse and foot and ravaged Upper Idumea, taking Caphethra, which calls itself a town, in his stride and setting it on fire, and after a preliminary assault, laying siege to Capherbin too. The walls was very strong indeed, and he was resigning himself to a long wait when, without warning, the inhabitants opened the gate, came forward with olive branches in their hands, and gave themselves up. After accepting their surrender, Zerilath made for Hebron, another very ancient city situated, as we have seen, in the hill country not far from Jerusalem. Forcing an entry, he slaughtered all he found there, old and young alike, and burnt the city to the ground. Every place had now been reduced but Herodium, Masada, and Machaerus, which were in the hands of the bandits. The target of the Romans was now Jerusalem itself. When Simon had got back his wife from the Zealots, he returned to what remained of Idumea, and harrying the nation from every direction, forced the majority to flee to Jerusalem. He followed them to the city himself, and again encircled the wall, killed any working men he caught going out into the country. The people found Simon outside more terrifying than the Romans, and the Zealots inside more savage than either. Of these, the Galileans' contingent was preeminent in the originality and audacity of their crimes. It was they who had put power in the hands of John, and he, from the pinnacle on which they had set him, rewarded them by leaving every man free to do as he liked. Their passion for looting was insatiable. They ransacked rich men's houses, murdered men, and violated women for sport, and drank their spoils, washed down with blood. Through sheer boredom, they shamelessly gave themselves up to effeminate practices, adorning their hair and putting on women's clothes, steeping themselves in scent and painting under their eyes to make themselves attractive. Well then, interesting, these zealots. Why does all of this sound familiar? So, they copied not merely the dress, but also the passions of women, and in their utter filthiness invented unlawful pleasures. They wallowed in slime, turning the whole city into a brothel, and polluting it with the foulest practices. I mean, San Francisco. I mean, it's just like, you know, it's when you hear these kinds of stories and you juxtapose it to the rest of the world, or at least, you know, if you're from Europe, you don't see this kind of thing being something. And this is probably one of the inherited issues, if you will, that the Jews bring with them, the ones that were for this stuff, that survived these slaughters, and that tradition kind of carrying on with these Jews who are not quite faithful type of persons to God, right? And you know, maybe 10 years ago or something, I would have heard these kinds of stories and said, I'm sure that's propaganda because Jewish writer, Jewish God, making transsexuality, homosexuality, and enjoying and having a good time and being free sounding worse than it actually is. But looking at what the left has been fighting for, it's like no, human beings can become like this, but at the same time, you're not seeing this endorsement much outside of these people. Sometimes we think not, right? Because, like, for instance, and the left happens to be these same kinds of people, they're not registering necessarily a discrimination between Jews and whites, right? And so I think a lot of people that have an issue with these things, they don't quite see the details in the picture, right? You can look in, like, if you're like a modern like leftist, right? You're pro-Democrat Party and democratic socialism. You are and you're anti-Israel. But the thing is that and you're also anti-white. You're anti-white, you're anti-Israel, but you're not anti-Jewish. But as an anti-Israel person, you're also not considering a fact of how many dual citizens are allowed to be in control of your country. Many a Jewish citizen who is doing the things that white men are blamed for because they are of a fairer skin of Jew, and you just don't think about it. You know, it's just like, sometimes I don't register I mean, I used to not. I do it all the time now just because it was important to understand these things. Guys, I mean, like you got Chuck Schumer in New York, that senator. You've got in Connecticut, you've got shoot, what the hell's his name? Darn it. I can't even think of his name. We've got the two senators as the older one, and he's Jewish. And from what I understand, most of these Jewish guys, I think Chuck Schumer included, are dual citizens. And it's kind of outrageous, I think, that a dual citizen can hold a high office like this. What do you think a dual citizen's agenda in foreign aid is going to fucking be in the Middle East? What favors are they going to be highly persuaded by? And so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on between people that hate the state of Israel and love the Jew. It's crazy. It's effing crazy, right? Sometimes I feel like I'm one of the only guys that's got a clear head. It's just like I don't hate the Jew, and I'm very indifferent to what's going on over there. I don't want to help or hinder them. I want to let them fight it out. But unfortunately, history repeats itself. Because here I am sitting in modern Rome, watching this empire that I live in work so hard to preserve a country that the rest of the region is rejecting. Or at least rejecting certain practices, right? Like, I don't see anything redeemable on either side. I mean, like, before the Palestine issue, modern Palestine issue, had gotten out of hand in recent years, going all the way back, all I would see is you've got the hard, squeezed out life of the people that are just tribally living in Palestine, the insistence on this state being placed here, and then to defend that state, the very Gestapo-esque presence of the security forces. And you can't just sit there and say, well, it's a great country because they're very kind to the gay man. It's just like it takes way more than being pro-gay to make you a good, healthy, liberal country. Because I don't see too many liberties there, right? And you would think that with all of this propaganda, you would be able to express what the core issue of Palestinians are beyond the idea of, oh, well, they just keep attacking us. And it's something else. And, it's whatever. I get it. Palestine's not a state, and whatever, man. Like, I'm not an anti-Semite. None of this is coming from anti-Semitism. I do enough just sporting the filthot. And then the further cognitive dissonance of having a Merkava tattoo on my arm right where a Jewish armband would belong in Nazi Germany. Isn't it funny the way I present myself? Isn't it hysterical? I think I am very confusing. And that might be keeping me alive and keeping people listening. But anyway, Yet, though they had the faces of women, they had the hands of murderers. They approached with mincing steps, then in a flash became fighting men. Mincing steps, yeah. This is this is men wanting to be treated like women, and then acting like women to get in close before they start yelling, "It's ma'am!" Right? And start acting all manly because they're ready to fight. The having it both ways. Look at this. Look at this. So, and drawing their swords from under their dyed cloaks, ran every passerby through. This is crazy. Look, welcome to America the last fucking 10 years. This is America the last 10 fucking years here. For fuck's sake. Those who ran away from John had a more murderous reception from Simon, and anyone who eluded the tyrant within the walls was killed by the tyrant outside the gates. Thus, for those who wished to desert to the Romans, every way of escape was cut off. But John's forces were in a mutinous state, and the entire Idumean contingent detached itself and attacked the usurper from jealousy of his power as well as hatred of his brutality. They joined battle and wiped out many of the zealots, chasing the rest into the royal palace built by Graept, a kinswoman of the king of Adiabene, Isis. The Idumeans poured in with them, then, driving them from there into the temple, set about looting John's effect. It was in this place that he himself was living and storing the spoils of his tyranny. Meanwhile, the mass of zealots scattered all over the city joined forces with the fugitives in the temple, and John got ready to lead them down against the citizens and the Idumeans. Later, being better fighters, feared their onset less than their madness. In the night, they might slip out of the temple, murder their opponents, and burn the city to the ground. So, they held a joint meeting with the chief priests to discuss the best means of guarding against their onslaughts. But God, it seems, turned their thoughts to foolish courses. And to save their lives, they chose a remedy worse than death. In order to overthrow John, they voted to admit Simon, an olive branch in hand, to bring in a second tyrant to be their master. The resolution was carried out, and they sent the high priest Matthias to implore Simon to enter, the man they so greatly feared. The invitation was supported by those citizens who were trying to escape the zealots and were anxious about their homes and property. He, in his lordly way, expressed his willingness to be their master and entered with the air of one who intended to sweep the zealots out of the city, acclaimed by the citizens as deliverer and protector. But when he and his forces were inside, his one purpose was to establish his own supremacy, and he looked upon those who had invited him as enemies no less than those he had been invited to suppress. Yeah, hey guys, trust me, vote for me, let me be your commander-in-chief, and everything will be all right. Don't question my motives. Okay. All right. Turn on them, men. Politics. Politician. Betrayings of the... Here we are. Thus, in Xanthikos, of the third year of the war, Simon became master of Jerusalem. John and the zealots, unable to leave the temple, and with all their possessions in the city lost, for their property had been instantly plundered by Simon's men, saw no hope of safety. Aided by the citizens, Simon began an onslaught on the temple. The enemy took their stand on the colonnades and the battlements and beat off their attacks. Many of Simon's men were killed and many were carried away wounded. From their commanding position, it was easy for the zealots to aim their shafts with telling effect. Having already the advantage of position, they further constructed 4 immense towers to enable them to hurl their missiles from a still greater height, one at the northeast corner, one above the gymnasium, the third at another corner opposite the lower city. While the last was set up over the roof of the priest's chambers, where one of the priests invariably stood to proclaim by trumpet blast in the late afternoon the approach of every 7th day, and on the next evening its close, calling it on the people in the first case to cease work, in the second to resume it. On these towers they mounted quick loaders and stone-throwing machines, along with archers and slingers. Simon's attacks now grew more hesitant. Most of the men being dispirited, all the same, he hung on. Having the advantage in numbers through the artillery with its longer range accounted for many of the men enraged. While all this was happening, Rome herself suffered severe shocks. Vitellius had arrived from Germany dragging along with his army a vast mob of hangers-on, and as the accommodations provided for the soldiers was inadequate, he turned the whole city into a camp and filled every house with armed men. In America, we don't do that. It's called the Third Amendment. No quartering of soldiers in your home. The Third Amendment, by the way, I believe, can be used as an argument for government surveillance devices being, an official policy in a personal computer or network system, right? So, for instance, if we were to find out that the government had a spy technology in this computer, in my home, I might have a Third Amendment argument that they are quartering, because it's not just about soldiers, it's about federal agency. I don't want the feds to have agency in my home as a presumed perfectly innocent, reasonable, rational, peaceable, natural law abiding man living in this realm. So, while all this was happening, Rome herself suffered severe shocks. Vitellius had arrived from Germany, dragging along with his army a vast... I read that. Every house quarter men, sorry. These were unused to the sight of Roman wealth and the silver and gold that glittered all around them. They could hardly restrain their covetous desires, but turned to plunder and the murder of any who got in their way. Such was the state of affairs in Italy. Vespasian, having crushed all opposition in the neighborhood of Jerusalem, went back to Caesarea. There he heard of the upheavals in Rome and the accessions of Vitellius. He knew how to obey as well as how to command, yet the news angered him. He could not accept as master one who had madly seized on the empire as if it was derelict, and in his distress at what had happened he could not endure the torture, and when his homeland was being ravaged, give his attention to wars elsewhere. But while anger drove him to her defense, the thought of the distance restrained him. The possibility that fortune might play many a scurvy trick before he could cross to Italy, especially if he sailed in the winter season, curbed his indignation, which was fast getting out of control. Excuse me. Oops. But his officers and men in informal groups were already talking openly of revolution and exploding with rage. The soldiers in Rome, living in luxury and afraid of the very word war, vote anyone they fancy on to the throne and appoint emperors with one eye to the main chance. We who have toiled and sweat and grown old in the service, let others enjoy this privilege, even when we have in our own camp a candidate with much stronger claims. is. Okay, bear with me. Let me double check the page count here. And how's it going, Nitwit? Do I know you, Nitwit? I think I've seen you around. Or known your name elsewise. All right, how many pages I got left here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pages left. Okay, got it. Good, yeah. That's fine. All right, so now we're going to play... Yeah. I might have read more than 5 pages because I could have sworn... Because I knew it was going to be 17 pages. Anyway, we'll be fine. Here's a Shadow of Intent, Infinity of Horrors. You know what? I didn't appreciate because I didn't notice it because I just picked it from like skimming over the how it sounded. This song was actually quite appropriate because like the music video is very cool. It's some very intense, some very intense. You need like the epilepsy warning for the video, but it's all sorts of military conquest by like it's kind of showing you fascism through the ages. It's kind of cool, and and it goes from the past into the future. So there, I'm gonna share the link on that one. Anyway. What better way to show we find? Oh, you've been checking out all the links, Nitwit. Very cool. Thank you. I don't know who, because I don't know. Like, sometimes I do a very minimalist share of what I'm doing, in varying degrees, right? Just because in some places I just like my heart says, stop. They don't want to freaking see your stuff. You're flooding their freaking thing, and you're making it all about you. I dealt with a whole lot of that kind of all you do is promote yourself here. I know it's like as if I want to succeed or something. But what better way shall we find of repaying his kindness to us if we throw this chance away? Vespasian's claim to the throne is far stronger than Vitellius's, just as we are far better soldiers than those who appointed him. The wars we have carried through were hardly trifles compared with those in Germany, and as soldiers we can stand comparison with those who brought that tyrant with them. But no consent will be necessary, neither senate nor people will put up with a filthy lout like Vitellius instead of a clean living man like Vespasian, or turn down a kindly leader in favor of a despotic brute, or choose a childless man as their chief rather than a father, for the best guarantee of peace is the outstanding excellence of princes. See, that's all very interesting, right? That's kind of like makes me think of here in America with our disposition towards presidents and the character of a president, right? So, now granted, there can be a whole lot of political delusions going on, right? Some people, for instance, could argue that Biden was the clean living man, and Trump was the pig, right? Because you can go back and listen to him making nasty little statements about his daughter on the Howard Stern show, and he's always sleeping with various women. He was on the secondary Epstein flight list. When I say secondary, I mean the allegedly non-criminal flight list. The one where it was just like, hey man, I can give you a ride. Not the, hey man, want to come to my island. He apparently never took a ride to the island or something to that effect. But anyway. If then it takes the experience of years to make good government, we have Vespasian. If the vigor of youth, Titus. The advantage of both ages will be combined, and not only shall we supply strength to those we appoint, we have 3 legions and contingents for the king, but they will be backed by all the East and as much of Europe as is safely out of Vitellius's reach, and by the allies in Italy, as well as Vespasian's brother and another son. One of these will be joined by many young men of distinction. The other has already been entrusted with control of the city, an immense asset for any candidate for imperial honors. In short, if we lose our chance, the Senate will most likely appoint the very man whose own soldiers, after helping him guard the empire, have passed him over. Such were the remarks passed by the knots of soldiers, who then joined forces, and urging each other on, declared Vespasian emperor, and called on him to save the tottering empire. He indeed had long been anxious about the general weal, but had never sought office for himself, for though aware that in view of his services he had a good claim, he preferred the safety of private life to the dangers of exalted position. But when he turned down their invitation, the officers were the more insistent, and the rank and file surrounded him sword in hand and threatened to kill him if he refused the life that that was his due. After earnestly impressing on them his many reasons for declining office, in the end, as he could not convince them, he accepted their nomination. Mucianus and the other officers now pressed him to assume the sovereignty. Now, by the way, see how he accepted their nomination and there was like threats with daggers and stuff? This is what we mean as conspiracy analysts, saying that you don't elect a president, they're selected. They're selected. Mucianus and the other officers now pressed him to assume the sovereignty, while the lower ranks loudly demanded that he should lead them against any that opposed him. But his chief anxiety was to get control of Alexandria, knowing that Egypt was the most important part of the empire because it supplied corn. Once master of Egypt, he felt sure that if hostilities dragged on, he could make Vitellius's position impossible, as the people of Rome would not be content to go hungry. Secondly, he wished to obtain the support of the 2 legions at Alexandria, and lastly, he planned to make the country his shield against the incalculable tricks of fortune. For Egypt is difficult to enter by land, and the coast is almost harborless. On the west, it is protected by the waterless region of Libya, on the south by the Aswan, separating Egypt from Ethiopia, and the unnavigable cataracts of the Nile. On the east by the Red Sea, which extends as far as Coptus. Its northern bulwarks are the district adjoining Palestine and the Egyptian Sea, where there is no anchorage at all. Thus Egypt is walled in on every side. Its length from Pelusium to Aswan is about 230 miles. The distance by sea from Plinthine to Pelusium is a little over 400. Let me guess, this annotation is going to say he was exaggerating, right? Because whenever there's a number, it's always, he's lying. These figures are wildly out. The first, much too small. The second, much too big. It's very annoying that this editor only freaking makes these notes. These are the only fucking notes in the whole translation that he cares about, and it's just to call Josephus a liar about his numbers. Without giving any rationalization as to why these numbers are off. This is why I almost want to say that this guy is just making bad assumptions because of what the foreword said, where he changed the names without changing the numbers. So a mile, if this was written in Europe by the same intelligence, they would have said kilometers. In which case, probably somebody said he was selling it short, because a kilometer is less than a mile, I believe. So anyway, the Nile can be navigated as far as the city of Elephantine, beyond which further progress is barred by the cataracts mentioned above. It is difficult even in peacetime for ships to approach the harbor of Alexandria. The entrance is narrow, and submerged rocks make a straight course impossible. The left side is shut in by artificial moles. On the right, the island of Pharos lies offshore, and from this rises an enormous lighthouse whose fires are visible 35 miles away. 35 miles away! That would be about from here, looking over the Long Island Sound to New York City is about 35 miles away. So, Yeah, so that would be the equivalency of a skyscraper. So anyway, warning, visiting ships to anchor at night well away from the shore because of the difficulty of making the port. The island is surrounded by immense artificial defenses. Hurling itself against these and breaking around the barriers opposite, the sea makes the channel rough and the narrow entrance treacherous. Inside, however, the harbor is perfectly safe and is 3.5 miles long. To this port is brought everything the country lacks for life and comfort. In return, what the land produces in excess of requirements is exported to every part of the world. So this is the explanation of how Egypt was holding its independence from Rome. So naturally, Vespasian was anxious to gain control there and to ensure the stability of the whole empire. The question is, can Vespasian perhaps, do something around Egypt to force them into a negotiating position by improving Rome's posture? Oh, thank you, Nitwit. That's why I do this. Thank you. That's the comments I love to hear. That makes me feel good because I think more channels ought to do what I'm doing. Right? They don't have to be live streams. Plenty of people have the patience to pre-record and then go back and cut. And it's not that it's that hard to do it, but it's just very tedious and time-consuming. And then, like someone like me, I get real anal. Like the last time I recorded myself going over something like that and then saying, let me cut this down. Oh, man, my head was hurting just saying like, you know what, this vocal pause is like, I didn't realize this was like a 3-second vocal pause. I can cut 2.5 seconds off of this vocal pause. It'll sound perfectly natural, and it'll save me a fraction of a second that'll add up to a minute by the time I'm done editing this hour down. This is the ridiculousness that I end up going through. But, yeah, exactly, because with my commentary, I can derive the context. I'm in my flow state. I'm letting my intuition guide me on thoughts that arise from passages that I read. Sometimes I've read things, I've glazed over them, and at least I've read them, right? And perhaps I'm hiding that I'm too dumb to know what he just said, right? But, I'm just very focused. Anyway, he sent at once to the governor of Egypt and Alexandria, Tiberius Alexander, to inform him of the army's determination, which forced him to shoulder the burden of empire and to seek the cooperation and assistance of the governor. After reading this letter aloud, Alexander enthusiastically called on soldiers and civilians alike to swear allegiance to Vespasian. Both were delighted to obey, knowing what an excellent man he was from his conduct of the campaign in Africa, invited thus to prepare the way for Vespasian's accession. He got everything ready for that general's arrival, and in a flash, rumor spread the news of the emperor in the east, and every city celebrated the good news and offered sacrifices on his behalf. Bear 1 second here. I want to ask myself, because of how many pages I got left. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to actually play the last break intended, because this is more than 15 pages that I'm reading, and somewhere I read more, I read like an extra page. I read an extra page somewhere. So, the cascade effect. I'd never heard of these guys before, and I gave them a shot. This is called suffering in silence, which is a term I've used as of late for various circumstances, not the least of which being my current state of no income, which has been painful and painful beyond painful. Anyway, here we are. There we go. Summer in Silence, the Cascade Effect. So, we're in the home stretch. This is the last portion of the show. The Mosian and Pannonian legions, still furious at the impudence of Vitellius, were even more delighted to swear allegiance to Vespasian. He, setting out from Caesarea, came to Beirut, where many deputations from Syria. Yeah, there's this little. You can't see that, can you? No, you can't. There's this spot right here where my. I keep forgetting I can also move it. There's this little headphone icon for the support center that's like floats around, and so it constantly pops up like right here, and then like I'm not certain of like the last 3 letters of a word before the line drops. Before they come for your 4th skin. Oh boy. Anyway, okay, so he's setting out to Syria from the Beirut, where many deputizations from Syria and many from other provinces met him, bringing from all the cities crowns and addresses of congratulations. Mucianus, governor of the province, arrived too, with news of the universal enthusiasm and the swearing of the allegiance in every city. Everywhere, things were going right for Vespasian, and with few exceptions, were combining to further his ends. He now felt that divine providence was helping him seize the reins of office, and that some just destiny was choosing him as monarch of the world. In one place after another, a succession of omens had foretold his reign. He specially remembered the words of Josephus, who, while Nero was still alive, had dared to address him as emperor. He was grieved to think that the man was still a prisoner in his hands, so he sent for Mucianus and his other officers and friends, and after first enlarging on Josephus's outstanding energy and the difficulties he had created for the Romans at Jotapata, he went on to describe the predictions which he himself had suspected at the time of being fictions springing from fear, but which had been proved by time and the course of events to be truly inspired. It is shocking, he said, that the man who prophesied my rise to power and was the mouthpiece of God should still be treated as a prisoner and endure the lot of a captive. Really? He was a mouthpiece? Like, was this guy Jewish? Or are we talking about, like, Jupiter here? Are we talking about Jove? Which, when you say he was a mouthpiece of God in Rome, I'm assuming, because, remember, part of the reason of the Jewish War's significance is the Jewish influence on Rome that was creeping after the alleged events of the Gospels. Then, summoning Josephus, he ordered him to be set free. Seeing a foreigner receive such recompense, the officers felt they could confidently expect wonderful things for themselves. But Titus, who was present with his father, exclaimed, "Father, it is only right that Josephus's disgrace should be removed as well as his fetters. It will be equivalent to a free pardon if instead of unfastening his chains we cut them through. This is the usual procedure in the case of a man unjustly fettered." Vespasian agreed, and a man came forward and severed the chains with one blow of an axe. Josephus, having thus, as a reward for his past prophecies, recovered his civil rights, was now believed capable of foretelling what was still to come. Okay, so they're talking about... Okay, yeah. So they're talking about Josephus. Not Flavius Josephus, but Josephus... Was he of Galilee? Was that where he was from? I can't even remember what I read a few days ago. Anyway, after replying to the deputations, Vespasian made a careful choice of governors for the various provinces and then proceeded to Antioch. There he considered what course to take and decided that his journey to Alexandria was less urgent than a settlement in Rome, since Alexandria was his already, but Rome was in a ferment because of Vitellius. So he sent Mucianus to Italy with a formidable body of horse and foot. Mucianus, afraid to sail in the depths of winter, marched his army overland through Cappadocia and Phrygia. Meanwhile, Antonius Primus, at the head of the 3rd Legion from Moesia, where he was in command, was rapidly advancing to do battle with Vitellius. Vitellius sent Caecina Alienus he's got alien in his name, with a large force to oppose him. Having complete confidence in this officer, in view of his defeat of Otho, setting out with all speed from Rome, he came face to face with Antonius near Cremona, a Gallic town just over the Italian frontier. But when he saw the size and discipline of the enemy force, he had no stomach for a fight, and a retreat seemed dangerous. He decided to change sides. So he defected. He defected just because he defected because he was being a coward. But anyway, assembling his centurions and tribunes, he urged them to go over to Antonius, minimizing the resources of Vitellius and magnifying the strength of Vespasian. The one, he said, was sovereign only in name, the other in fact. It was better for them to recognize the inevitable and adapt themselves to it, and as they were bound to be defeated if they gave battle, they must escape the danger by their wits. Vespasian was quite capable. Without their assistance of winning all that was not yet in his grasp, Vitellius, even with it, could not hold what he had. Speaking to this effort at considerable length, Caecina persuaded his whole force to desert to Antonius. But that very night the soldiers changed their minds, realizing with horror that the man who had sent them might prove the winner. So, drawing their swords, they dashed off to kill Caecina, and would have carried out their intentions if the tribunes had not fallen on their knees and begged them not to. They refrained from killing him, but bound the traitors with the intention of sending him to Vitellius. Informed of this, Primus at once summoned his men and led them fully armed against the mutineers. These formed a line and resisted for a while, but soon turned tail and made for Cremona. Primus at the head of his cavalry. I keep thinking of Primus the band every time I hear the name. I'm waiting for a big brown beaver to be the decisive moment in the battle or something. Anyway, of his cavalry prevented their entrance, encircled and destroyed the bulk of them before the city, and sweeping in with the survivors, gave his troops permission to loot the town. The consequences was that many foreign businessmen and many of the inhabitants lost their lives, as well as Vitellius's entire army of 30,200 men. Of the soldiers from Moesia, 4,500 perished. Antonius set free Caecina and sent him to Vespasian to report his triumph on his arrival. Caecina was received with such unexpected honors that his shocking treachery was soon forgotten. At Rome, too, Sabinus was more confident now that he knew Antonius was approaching to collecting the cohorts of armed watchmen. He seized the capital in the night. At daybreak he was joined by many of the nobles, among them Domitian, his brother's son, the chief pillar of his hopes of victory. Vitellius cared little about Primus, but was furious with those who were supporting Sabinus in his revolt. His congenital brutality making him thirst for noble blood. The part of his army which had returned with him to Rome he flung against the capital. The utmost heroism was displayed both by these and by the men who defended the temple. But in the end, numbers told and troops from Germany captured the hill. Domitian and many leading citizens had a remarkable escape, but the rest of the garrison was annihilated. Sabinus was brought before Vitellius and put to death, while the soldiers stripped the temple of its treasures and set it on fire. The next day, Antonius marched in with his army. The soldiers of Vitellius met him, joined battle in 3 areas of the city, and perished to a man. Out of the palace came Vitellius, drunk, and as a last fling, gorged to the eyes like the glutton he was, dragged through the crowd, insulted and tormented in every possible way. He was knifed to death in the heart of his capital. After a reign of 8 months and 5 days, he had happened to live longer, I doubt whether, if he had happened to live longer, I doubt whether the empire could have satisfied his lust. Other known casualties totaled more than 50,000 dead. All this took place on the 3rd of Apelios, and there's an annotation for this date. The 21st of December by the Roman calendar, the winter solstice. The next day, Mucianus entered with his army and stopped further slaughter by Antonius's men, who were still searching the houses and killing many of Vitellius's soldiers and many supposed partisans among the civilians, letting their rage forestall any careful discrimination. All of this would then, if it happened on the solstice, would almost be like a manifestation of the Lord of Misrule, right? Because you've got the Emperor's throne in flux and crazy disputes of loyalty of who is going to be the delegation under which supports this emperor, right? And so Vitellius is just having a bad day. And just trying to destroy people that failed him. So he then put forward Domitian, recommending him to the assembled citizens as head of the state till his father arrived. The people, free at last from fear, acclaimed Vespasian as emperor and held a combined celebration for his establishment on the throne and Vitellius's overthrow. After arriving at Alexandria, Vespasian received the good news from Rome, and envoys came from all over the world to congratulate their new sovereign, so that the city, bigger than any but Rome, proved too small for the swollen population. Now that the whole empire was secure and the supremacy of Rome so surprisingly reestablished, Vespasian turned his attention to the final stages of the Judean campaign. He was eager, however, to embark for Rome in person as soon as winter ended, and was putting all his energy into getting things straight in Alexandria. But he sent Titus with the pick of his army to destroy Jerusalem. Titus marched overland to Nicopolis too, and a half-mile from Alexandria. There he put his army on board naval vessels and sailed up the Nile past the district of Mendes to the city of Thymuis. Disembarking there, he marched to the little town of Tanis, where he camped for the night. His second stopping place was Heracleopolis, his third Pelusium. Here, for 2 days, he rested his army, and the next morning crossed the Pelusian River mouths, and after marching all day across the desert, pitched camp by the temple of Casian Zeus, going on next day to Ostrakine. At the stopping place, there was no water. The inhabitants have to fetch it from elsewhere. After this, he broke his journey at Rhinocorura, marching on from there in Raphia, his fourth stopping place, a town on the Palestinian frontier. His fifth camp he pitched at Gaza, then on to Ascalon, Jamnia, and Joppa, ending up at Caesarea, where he had decided to assemble his other units. So yes, Caesarea is such a huge strategic city here. You notice this, right? Because that's pretty much how it's designed. The city is meant to be like Caesar's Judean sanctuary, right? When he's doing his campaigns away from Rome. And then I wonder, you got Rhinocorura and Elephantine in Egypt, right? I'm wondering if these places are responsible for naming rhinos and elephants. But I'm not going to look that up now because that's not really relevant. It's just an amusing of a question. And so, with that, next week we will be on 17, the Siege of Jerusalem, the first stages. All right. 276 out of 426. So we are a little over halfway. It seems like it's more than halfway because of where the marker is here. Let me take a look down and see, like, because sometimes a book comes to an end and then there's the afterwards. Yeah. There's a lot of... Okay, so this book is running about 400... is actually about 400 pages. And then there will be 25 or so pages, 25, 26 pages of appendix, right? And I might read one or two things in the appendix if they're worth it. There's a lot of stuff that is, there's an index as well, which gives you an alphabetical order of names and what pages those names are mentioned on. And there's also a map. Let me show this real quick. This is neat. This is neat. So here for your indulgence is one of the Palestine in the 1st century AD. Here's Caesarea. And then that's Joppa, Jamnia. Here's Jerusalem here. Jericho, Herodium. Acrobata. Is that where they invented acrobatics? There's Mount Tabor, Mount Carmel, Jotapata. Most of this side is not really talked about. Everything is on this side of the map, ultimately. Let me see. Is that the only map? Wait, okay, here's more maps. There's a map of Jerusalem. Court of Women. Is this the temple? Holy of Holies. Yeah, so this is the temple, allegedly. Yeah, that's it. There's just these 3 maps. Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, so that's it. Anyway, like I said, hopefully I can do something before Friday or Saturday. But I may forego. It may take me till Saturday to get the next reading done. We'll see how this job treats me. I'll see what my energy is like. I'll see how much sleep I can stand to get. Like I said, it's about a 10 to 7 kind of gig. So it's like I can sleep in a little bit within reason. Okay? So I will catch you guys real soon. Thank you so much, Saniko, Nitwit, and who else was here? And Theo. All right, thank you guys. Thank you those in the future that check me out. Let me know how you feel about everything that I am doing here, and any little suggestions that are going to sound good to me, right? Because I may want to reject your suggestions just because I'm this barbarian doing this thing this way. I'm a very simple man. All this ought to be sufficient. Who needs a goddamn production? Have a good night.